Welcome back. This is the Voice of Russia. U.S. President Barack Obama has addressed members of the G8 summit. It is the president's first visit to Northern Ireland. He is there with his family. The big brother's watching you. Head of the Russian Foreign Affairs Committee, Alexei Pushkov, has called reports that the U.S. and U.K. were spying on Russian President Dmitry Medvedev as scandalous. 105 people, among them one Russian, have been arrested during unrest in Ankara. The Russian embassy is currently verifying this information. And the Russian Rostech Corporation has presented the new jet fighter Sukhoi at the Le Bourget International Air Show. To our top story now, the two-day summit of the Group of Eight opens on Monday in Golf Resort in the Northern Ireland. The forum will bring together the leaders of the world's top economies, the United Nations, Japan, Canada, Russia, Germany, France and Italy. The two-year civil war in Syria tops the agenda of the gathering. Russian President Vladimir Putin and British Prime Minister David Cameron have already discussed the burning issue during their Sunday talks in London. Putin renewed his criticism of the Western position in startling tones, describing Assad's foes as cannibals. Now, will Russia and the West find a common group on the hot issue of the Syrian conflict? To talk more on that, we're now joined live on the phone by Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor of Politics First from London. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us. Will the foreign participants, in your view, find a common ground on the burning Syrian issue?
I think it's very, very unlikely that that will happen at the G8 summit in Belfast. I think the first indication of that was the press conference given yesterday at Downing Street by Prime Minister David Cameron and President Vladimir Putin. It was a very frosty, very chilly press conference. What we're basically seeing now is the bitter division over Syria, whereby the West has now recently announced that it will be arming the Syrian militants led by the United States. And of course, Russia is completely opposed to that. Russia, from the very start of the conflict in Syria over 2 years ago, has been resolutely in favor of supporting state sovereignty and is completely opposed to foreign intervention in Syria. So it's very unlikely that there's going to be any sort of resolution, any sort of substance for a resolution regarding Syria at the summit.
So does it look like the G8 or the G7 plus summit right now over the Syrian issue? Minding that Russia takes a different position.
Well, in regard to, if we just focus in regard to Prime Minister David Cameron, he's been toiling with the idea of arming the militants in Syria, but that could be derailed now because what we're seeing in the last few days is a lot of very senior British politicians and other officials who have now come out openly. They've come out publicly and they've warned against Britain supplying the militants with arms. In today's Daily Telegraph, a national newspaper in Britain, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, he's completely come out against it, and he's warned that Britain should not be arming, and I quote, maniacs. He's referring to the Free Syrian Army. Yesterday, we had Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg warn against it. Today, the former chief of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, has come out against arming the FSA. And we're also hearing that up to 81 Conservative MPs from David Cameron's own party, the Conservative Party, are actually against it. So it's becoming a really very difficult issue for David Cameron now on the back of the referendum on the EU and gay marriage. It really is dividing his party.
How will the conflict, in your view, develop further if Syrian rebels indeed get weaponry from the United States and the Assad regime supporters get Russian S-300 missiles?
Regrettably, I think that the West, led by the United States, are the ones who have blood on their hands. The conflict in Syria can only be resolved politically. We have to remember that over the last 2 years, ordinary Syrian people are the ones who've been bearing the brunt of this appalling war. And if anyone in the West really thinks that pouring weapons into this conflict is going to help to resolve it or tilt the balance in the other way, they're seriously mistaken. So it's ironic that Russia's accused of having blood on its hands by people in the West when it's actually the other way. But in regard to Barack Obama's decision last week, or announcement last week, to arm the militants, I think we need to look carefully at that. What we're hearing is that, yes, a decision has been taken to arm the militants in Syria, but at the moment it's light weapons. And of course, we're hearing talk about a no-fly zone, but I think that's very unrealistic. A no-fly zone wouldn't happen because Russia would veto it at the United Nations Security Council. And also the Syrian air defense systems across the country, there are Russian military personnel attached to them. So if Western aircraft was to start bombing those positions, there's a very strong possibility that Russian military personnel would be killed. And then what? So I don't think a no-fly zone is seriously going to happen. But yes, a decision has been taken to supply light arms to the militants in Syria. But once again, light arms, I think we need to step back and reassess this situation. I suspect that Barack Obama, 2 years ago, even perhaps a year ago, saw an opportunity in Syria to replace the Syrian government, to replace President Assad, and with that, to have installed a Western-friendly government. But I don't think he ever really wanted to get too involved in Syria. And I think that decision last week to arm the Syrian rebels, I think he's attempting to appease an audience, and that audience are the hawks on Capitol Hill, led by Senator John McCain. I don't think we really are going to see heavy weaponry being sent to the militants, i.e. anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles. I don't think Barack Obama actually wants in-depth American involvement in this. I think that decision last week was to appease an audience and to try and justify to his audience by saying the Syrian government have crossed a red line, quote, and we're doing something about it. But I really don't think we're going to see anything more.
We'll see. We'll be closely watching how the G8 summit develops, and in particular the talks on Syria and whether it's possible during this short summit in Northern Ireland to find a political solution to this military conflict. We very much appreciate your insight. Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor of Politics First from London, was live on the phone with us.